Hey guys, welcome back to the podcast. I am Amanda.
I'm Laura.
And I'm Kendra.
And today we have a special guest star, and I'll let Kendra introduce her.
Yay! Hi, Andrea. We are welcoming Dr. Andrea Austin. She is a leading emergency physician, simulation educator, and advocate for physician well-being. And our dear friend, too. Let's put it that. As a prior lieutenant commander in the United States Navy, her active duty Navy career included a deployment to Iraq in 2016. She later became the first woman emergency medicine physician stationed at the Navy Trauma Training Center at LA County, USC, one of the busiest trauma centers in the United States. Serving at the forefront of emergency medicine at the Navy Trauma Training Center at LA County, USC, and significantly affecting military medical personnel training, Dr. Austin advocates for a supportive healthcare culture, emphasizing her commitment to physician well-being and innovation. And she has her own podcast. It's called Heartline.
Yay. Oh my goodness. You're making me blush.
We are so happy to have you today and so excited that we got to have you on so that you can talk about your recently launched book. It's so exciting.
Thank you. Yes. What a labor of love.
So we will dive right in. I got a chance to, I haven't read the whole thing, but I've gotten to dig in about 75% of it. And so some of these are my favorite things that I think would make for great conversation, and just really proud of you for just bringing a lot of this conversation to print, and then the opportunity to get to distribute it so that many more people I know are going to relate to this, not just physicians either. I mean, some of this is really, really important to get out there as just conversations.
I have a question. What is the title of the book?
Revitalized.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Revitalized. And the subtitle is A Guidebook to Following Your Healing Heartline.
I love that.
Okay. So in your book, you talk about hyperfunctioning, which we've mentioned on a podcast before, hyperfunctioning versus underfunctioning. And both can be actually a very maladaptive coping strategy. And I'd like to just pull out a little part in your book, if that's okay with you, Dr. Austin.
Absolutely. And please call me Andrea. I'm among friends today.
Okay, this is part, I'm not sure what chapter, but when you talked about the hyperfunctioning, you said, when we talk about hyperfunctioning in terms of how we think and process, it's like our minds are always on overdrive. It's as if our brains are like computers with too many apps running simultaneously, working around the clock with no downtime. This state involves a lot of thinking, planning, analyzing, and worrying. Of course, the worrying, kind of like having a bunch of browser tabs open all at once. Who can relate, people? Who can relate?
Yep.
So talk about this hyperfunctioning.
You know, I think the sneaky part about hyperfunctioning is it's really embedded in the world right now. We're moving at a really fast rate with AI and all sorts of different things that are trying to get us to speed up at warp speed all the time. And then certainly medical culture really runs on hyperfunctioning. You know, when you think back to, I remember cardiology rounds and surgery rounds where you get a list of sometimes 12 or 20 patients you had to round on in the morning. And it was just overwhelming. And you really did have to hyperfunction to be able to see that number of patients and, churn through all the data on the chart and write notes. So it becomes the new normal, but we're really not meant to hyperfunction. And people wear out at different phases. You know, I know many of you have done some work in the holistic health space, and I truly believe that our cortisol levels at some point, mine were actually measured as almost non-existent, and my little adrenal gland said, girl, we can't do it anymore. And so people hit that wall at different points. You know, for me, it was 2021, and hyperfunctioning was a big part of what I had to let go of. Now, do I still do it sometimes? I mean, the metaphor of the browser tabs being open. The other day I was working on a podcast and then something else related to another job and then this and that. And I literally looked, I had 30 tabs open, and I'm like, oh, just like my book.
I think sometimes it brings us comfort. I don't know. Maybe with working as EM physicians, we have Epic open, x-rays we're looking at, bells and whistles in the background, someone coming up, can I get pain meds? Can I get this? Can I do this? Can you sign this? Can you look at this EKG? I don't know. Maybe that's how we work our best. I don't know. And then so when we're at home or doing other things, if we don't have 30 browsers open, we start to question our efficacy.
Yeah, that is a huge issue that we see over and over with coaching with physicians. You probably do too, Andrea. We're so used to external validation and somehow earning our worth and proving our worth that like we're really uncomfortable just being a human being, just existing. Like we are always over proving that we're worthy, and that's not the best thing, I don't think.
Yeah,
But
absolutely. Yeah, I
yeah.
mention it in the book that my friend Kat asked what I was like doing to take care of myself. And I started listing out workout things that I was doing. And she's like, Andrea, that's still work. Like,
Yeah.
that's actually not being still. That's not resting. I was like, oh, you're right.
Huh.
Working out in the ways that I tend to gravitate towards is being in constant motion as well.
Yeah. It's funny when we talk about being human beings rather than human doings. And like a lot of us are like, oh, well, I'm really good at being a human doing.
Right.
I don't know about the being part though. But it sounds like from your book that there are some similar issues with the Navy and medical culture. And you talk about specifically serving in the Navy and the challenges while being deployed in Kuwait. Can you tell us a little bit how the military is like medical culture in addressing mental health issues?
Yeah, I think something as large as the military, I hesitate to put it all into one basket. There's, pockets that are doing a really fantastic job. And certainly there's wonderful mental health professionals serving the military. That being said, there are still some really big cultural issues that mental health, emotional challenges are viewed as weaknesses. And let's face it, the military is about being strong. It's about being warriors. And that has typically looked like a male prototype of being a muscular, strong man, even though that some of the skills the military needs right now are actually not that based on, the world we're living in, the complexities as we look at, cybersecurity and all the other threats that really don't require the typical prototype that have been in the military. The biggest issue that I highlight in the book is, and I think this is true in medical culture too, is we tend to have this very binary way of thinking about somebody having a mental health problem. So they're either good or defective. And the truth is, it's a continuum, right? So people, we know this, we work in the emergency department, we talk to people having mental health problems every day. People can be chronically suicidal. People can have suicidal thoughts and not have a mental health diagnosis. In fact, people commit suicide that don't meet any diagnostic criteria for a mental health illness. And that level of nuance is hard for organizations, whether it's a medical board or the military. And, the last thing I'll say on this is coming back to this idea that not everyone who commits suicide or has suicidal thoughts is mentally ill or has a diagnosis. A lot of times this happens due to toxic work environments. And there is not enough mental health in the world. We're all mental health advocates on this podcast today, but there's not enough psychiatrists, psychologists, social works, therapists that can be added to the medical realm or the military to counteract toxic working conditions. And until we start to address that, then we're not really going to move the needle.
Thank you for saying that.
I really like how you had in your book, I included an excerpt just that you said that about the military, that, it's the culture. So it's not unlike us working in the medical field or the medical culture that we were trained in, that it's tough. I mean, the work environment is like probably 80% of it. And that just that even if you experience a mental health event at some point, like an isolated case of harassment or bullying, or even just the sleep deprivation that you noted in your book, that's stressful. And so having broad idea of mental health support in the military and the medical field, there's no nuance. That's what you said. Like a one size fit all approach is not going to work there. It really lacks that nuance. And I appreciate that, because just like you said, there are times when you'll have an isolated incident that cause you to spiral, or it will trigger a trauma or something. And it really needs to have that nuance.
Yeah, absolutely. And, it's interesting. I was working with some residents the last 2 days in the simulation lab, and I went up to the intensive care unit, which we all remember ICU rotations. They're just hard. They work long hours. There's just, as the medical system's designed right now, not any way around that. And I started the simulation session with Brene Brown's 2-word check-in. And I said, just 2 words. How are you feeling right now? Universally, the first word was tired or exhausted by everybody. The second word was often pretty negative too. It was like anxious or worried or something like that. And the first time that I did this, like 2 days ago, I was kind of taken aback. As you can tell from the book, I'm an empath. So I just kind of sat there and I was like, everybody said 2 negative words. Should I do the simulation? So I actually gave a choice and I said, so we can practice central lines, or we can go take a walk. We can go get coffee. We can also do central lines and you can cycle out and take breaks. And the interesting thing that happened is they all kind of like looked at me and they said, okay, we're actually good. Can we just do the central lines? And they all stayed the entire session. And I'm still kind of like letting that roll over in my mind. But what I think I'm taking away from it, and I'll turn it back to you, is they just needed the pop-off valve. They just needed somebody to ask. And then they kind of self-soothed and regulated themselves. And they were like, actually, probably my anxiety will go down if I just practice these central lines right now.
Yeah, it's interesting. You almost get, like we talk about getting permission or giving permission, like permission to rest, take a nap, whatever. It was almost like you validated that you heard that they were exhausted, anxious, worried, whatever, and then validated it in your way of just offering, okay, well, let's take a breather.
Yeah, so simple.
I'm so jealous that your trainees have an attending like you, because I don't recall anything like that ever happening. Even though I had amazing attendings, I don't think that we were aware. I'm hopeful that we are learning things as time goes on. But what a gift to just hold space for them, which probably hadn't happened in a long time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So next, we are going to reference, because we get a little baby shout out in the book, and it's specifically a graph from one of the articles that we had published in Emergency Medicine News about arrival fallacy, which, Tal Ben-Shahar in his book Happier coins this term. But how did you adapt it for your book? Or what is it about arrival fallacy that was revealing for you to put it in your book?
Yeah, so huge shout out. I actually mentioned you a few times, the whole physicians. When I say you, I'm saying all of you in the book. So you've definitely shaped a lot of my thinking over the last few years. And I'm really, really thankful for that. And so, the residents that I teach, there's very real bits of TWP, even in our sim lab. Your poster is there. So
Go on.
So coming back to that brilliant graph that you introduced me to at the AWEP meeting last year, so the American College of Emergency Physicians Women's Section meeting, it was one of those lectures. I mean, when you think back to like all the lectures that all of us have been at, I mean, at this point, hundreds, if not thousands of talks that we've listened to. And this lecture like stopped me in my tracks that you gave, because it suddenly it was like one of those moments where you feel like you're in the Matrix and you just like seen behind the screen, because it was relevant on so many levels. So, coming back to that, I didn't explicitly say it earlier. When I was in Kuwait, I had some suicidal thoughts that night, and I talk about it in the book. And what bothered me is I never really understood what happened. I went to therapy afterwards. I still go to therapy, and I don't have depression. I don't have anxiety. I don't have a diagnosis that would be in the DSM-5. So then it was kind of like, so what happened? And, for us as doctors, it's like, if I don't understand what happened, then that scares me, because it's like, could it happen again? And it finally made sense when I looked at that graph, because it was like, oh, I think, what did you call it in the upper left-hand corner I call it the achievement treadmill.
Yeah, so Tal Ben-Shahar calls that the rat race, where you're just doing.
Yeah. Yeah. So I adapted it a few years ago. I started using this feeling of the achievement treadmill because I like the visual of there's times where I feel like I can't, especially when I was in the military, because it's kind of like you just have to do things. You're not given choices about, you can't quit. I mean, if you quit, you go literally to jail, which is called the brig in the military. So there were times that I felt being on the treadmill, I couldn't adjust the speed, how fast I needed to run, or the height, how hard. I have a really funny story about that. Maybe we'll get to. So, treadmill. And so, what happened that night on deployment is I fell into the bottom left part of that graph, which was nihilism. And I mean, I know what nihilism is, but I was like, I'm not a nihilistic person. Well, we can all have nihilistic thoughts. And honestly, I think nihilistic thoughts are very common in emergency medicine. I'm going to work a shift today. I promise you, I'm going to hear somebody say, doesn't really matter. The system's effed. Like,
Absolutely.
just they're going to say some nihilistic things today. And so I just fell into the nihilism trap for a little bit that night. And, I was isolated, just by myself. Typically when I've had a bad day at work, I come home and I have my husband and my dogs, and that just wouldn't happen. So now I at least know that, nihilism is a very dangerous place to stay for long periods of time.
Yeah, I'm glad that you referenced the being alone. That's such a classic story and such a high risk story that you were telling there, because doctors who commit suicide, that's exactly what they do. They isolate themselves and tell themselves stories and talk themselves out of life. And I'm really, really grateful that you were able to pull yourself out of that. That must have been really, really scary.
And thank you for sharing.
Lots of shame there.
Yeah.
Sorry, Amanda.
No, yes, thank you for sharing. Because of that shame, I think that whenever some of us slip into a little brief period of nihilism, then think there's something broken about us, when it makes perfect sense, when the conditions line up, combine that with sleep deprivation, combine that with lots of other things. But look, here is an example of someone who has gone on and done amazing things with her life, and also had a brief period where she considered the unthinkable. You're not alone. And so I thank you for sharing that testimony.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think, those thoughts and feelings are probably more common than we realize. And when your brain, especially when your brain gets so exhausted, it's like, I'm going to get rest however I can. And like, that's the way it thinks of, I can just check out. So yeah. You also mention the magic equation, pain times resistance equals suffering. Pain is inevitable. It's part of the human experience. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, thank you, TWP, for introducing me to that. And Cherie Johnson also introduced me to this concept too, I think around the same time. So I attribute both of you for that. Looking back at the pandemic, I felt like being angry at people not wearing masks, or angry at people that were, posting myths and disinformation and driving up the number of people coming to the emergency department, was a form of resistance. Anger is for me, a very alluring emotion. It feels active, and, as a hyperfunctioner, it feels like something's happening. But the problem is, whatever the thing is, people not wearing masks, whatever it is still going to happen, which you all know very, very well. And on some levels, I knew this. There's a phrase that I've said to my residents over the years, that when something terrible is happening to a patient in front of us, you have to go through the stages of grief very quickly and get to acceptance. Because whether it was your fault that the person's getting, worse, or it was just the progression of their disease, there'll be a time and a place for that. But what is happening, and we have to accept that reality and then choose the next best action. So I know that clinically, probably because I'm faced with, literally holding someone's life in our hands. But outside of clinical work, it's very easy to get stuck in cycles of brooding or bottling, ruminating. And those are very seductive places to go when we're really upset with various things happening.
Yeah. It feels good. It's sometimes, especially when we feel disempowered, to become angry really does help you feel a little bit more powerful. The problem is, it's like we say we're drinking poison and expecting other people to die because they have no idea. They have 99% of the time, we're not even telling them that we're mad at them. So, and it's not making any difference. So it's just not super healthy to do long term.
Yeah. I think it's balancing though, right? And I'd be interested in what your thoughts are on this because you still have to feel the emotion. I think my gut on this is like if you look at how long it takes for most emotions to move through you, it's like 90 seconds or, 2 minutes for the most part. So you got to like let that happen and attend to yourself, but then after that it's like, okay, at this point I'm disappointed, I am angry, I'm hurt. Based on that, what's the best next step?
Yeah. I don't think we're talking about the 2 minutes of rage. It's more like the 2 weeks of just,
It shouldn't
giving
be like
ourselves toxic thoughts over and over and over again and just relishing in the rage. That's not, that just, it's not going to make us happy people, surprisingly.
right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Our patients dying is painful enough without then raging against the machine and piling more suffering on top of it with that it shouldn't be this way. Well, you're arguing with reality.
Right.
I'm telling you that you lose every time.
I know.
So it's already painful enough. Like, let's just make it a multiplier of 1 so that it's just that amount of pain instead of exponentially more.
Right. Like, don't be like Don Quixote fighting the windmills. It's kind of pointless. So we love that you devote an entire chapter to humor. That's our love language right there, Andrea. Thank you. Tell us about that.
Yes, so fun. And probably some people are listening like, Andrea is a very serious person. I'm surprised she wrote a chapter on humor, but I love laughing and I grew up watching sitcoms back in the 90s during the, sitcom heyday of Seinfeld, and I love Julie Louis-Dreyfus from Seinfeld, and then later Veep is one of my favorite shows of all time. And I love your meme Mondays. So they're very, very funny. But like everything, humor can have like dark humor is a genre. And we have our own version in medicine. We have gallows humor, and everyone here has heard it. I have partaken in gallows humor. And to make it really, clear for people, these are really dark and inappropriate jokes that are made at the expense of patients or other people in other specialties. And what I talk about in the book is I use the rules of comedy. And so the number one rule of comedy is don't punch down. And when you think about us as physicians, there's a huge power differential between us and our patients, between us and frankly most staff in the hospital, including medical students and residents. So making sure we're not punching down. And so if it's a joke that, you wouldn't say in front of a patient, maybe it's not a good joke to be saying at work, period. I think I love your meme Mondays and don't stop. And I'm not trying to be up on my pedestal about that. But what I have seen from my own self is I think sarcasm in medicine is like a decadent dessert. And we should partake in it from time to time. And it is a coping mechanism. But if you go back through your DMs and all you send are we live, there was this meme on deployment of we live on planet BS or whatever. If that's all you're sending all the time, it does start to affect you. So I would just encourage people to kind of think about that, because if you send 10 snarky, or that's all the videos you watch going into your shift, you have primed your brain to pretty much think everything is crap. So I would just kind of, think about that. But there's plenty of times you can use adaptive humor. I just coined that term just now. More adaptive humor. I think about, honestly, our patients, sometimes they open the door to it. And so if a patient opens the door, you got to use your emotional intelligence. But frankly, some things that happen to the body are funny. And sometimes the ridiculousness of our system is so silly. So sometimes it's just, it helps to laugh at it. So I think kind of following the cues of people around you. And, you know, I used to laugh all the time and be a lot like more lighthearted when I entered medicine. And it was, you know, over time that I became more armored and more serious. So, you know, as my burnout has diminished, I've felt that softening and that lightheartedness return.
I will say on the last Meme Monday, I posted a bunch of, we're actually doing a little mini course on relationships. So I had posted like a bunch of like snarky marriage memes all in a row, and someone reached out. They were like, "Are you okay?" I probably should have put it like a, "Hey, I'm just researching for like a lecture that we're putting together. We're fine." Whoops.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had that same experience though. After recovering from burnout, I did find that really being sarcastic and dark did affect me negatively, and I was able really to connect with patients better when I came in wholeheartedly and really, you know, looking at why I was there, what my meaning in being a doctor was, and looking at each of my patients as a fellow equal human being really does help so much.
Yeah, 100%. And then I think, you know, we all have to kind of, after going through that, kind of rehabilitate, like, okay, so how can I incorporate this lighthearted part of me back into this more wholehearted version of me? And it, you know, it comes, and you know, now it's so enjoyable when I have these exchanges with patients and my colleagues too.
I love that. Yeah. It's you can find things to joke about that aren't mean. Yeah. There's actually so much that's quite hilarious in the ER that is not mean. So thank
Just the
you.
sounds alone.
I know. No. Yeah. So many things to entertain us and still be kind, loving doctors.
Well, thank you, Andrea, so much for coming back on our podcast for a little repeat action. Tell our audience how we can get this amazing book that we have highlighted in this podcast.
Yes, thank you so much. So you can go to my website, AndreaAustinMD.com, and there's two options for you there. You can select a button to request an autographed copy, and I will send one to you there. Or you can go to Amazon if you'd prefer that, but there's no way for me to sign it if you order directly from Amazon, but that's totally fine. I love the immediacy of Amazon, and it's a good option. And there's the Kindle ebook version. And soon I'll have other options available like Barnes and Noble. And I hope to have bookshops.org soon. And then last, the audiobook, I'll probably wait until January. So if you're a person that listens to books, I'm planning to drop it with the new year, kind of for people that kind of want something that would help with that new year vibe.
Awesome. And this book isn't just for physicians. Like we said, it has got a lot of great information for all professionals, moms that stay at home. There's just a lot of goodness in there. So you could really not go wrong if you're looking for some Christmas presents. I know, aren't we starting that right now? We're shopping for Christmas, right? So here you go. You're welcome. We've already given you a gift. So please, please, please go out and buy your book. And thank you so much again, Andrea, for the work that you're doing, not only paving the way and being a mentor to the residents and interns, medical students, everyone in the sim lab, for just really taking it to the next level, reframing and restructuring what it looks like to really grow up that next generation of competent clinical physicians that actually know how to take care of themselves too. So thank you. Thank you for the work that you do and for taking care of patients and for just being a part of this circle who really does care about physician well-being and are looking to do the meaningful things that will really help our colleagues out. So thank you very much.
Right back at all of you and all the great work that you're doing. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. So if something in this podcast has helped you, please leave us a review. Scroll down, give us a 5-star rating and leave a review because it helps just make our ripple that much bigger. And until next time, you are whole, you are a gift to medicine, and the work you do matters.